Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the panel discussion on shaping the conversation. And we're going to start out first by introducing each of the panel members. I'm Kathy Wright. I'm director of Rug Hooking Week at Sauter Village in Ohio. And I'm also the co-author, editor, and publisher of the Rug Hooking Traditions books. And so I'm going to kind of be talking about the promotion and the publicity and the event side. And then Peg Irish, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes. Is this working? Peg Irish. I live in New Hampshire, and I've been hooking since 1980. I grew up in California and knew nothing about rug hooking, but when I moved to New England, my husband's aunt said, "This house needs rugs." So that's how I got started. And I'll talk to you more later.
I'm Susan Feller, and I hail from West Virginia in the United States. I started hooking in 1994, traveled all over Nova Scotia, lived in Boston, had no idea rug hooking existed in the 80s. But it's a fascinating journey I'm on.
Hello, I'm Brigitta Fye. I live in Sebastopol, California. I've been hooking since 1997, fourth generation rug hooker. I own Green Valley Rug Hooking, and I'm also secretary of the National ATHA Guild. And I'll be talking about trends and rug hooking in business and ideas about shaping the conversation.
So the general concept here was I kind of divided into 3 steps. Who are we? What do we call ourselves? Are we crafters? Are we artists? Are we folk artists? Are we designers? Are we textile artists? There are so many different names. So there are lots of choices on that aspect, but then what do we call our work? You know, that's a totally different aspect. And then how do we value and regard our work? And how does the public and private collectors and museums and curators and the retail market, how do they perceive our work? And then the second aspect is as artists individually or as groups or organizations, what roles can we play in our community to make our art more accessible, more understandable, and bring it to the public's eye. And then since we're all here at the TIGHR conference, how can TIGHR play a bigger role in bringing our art to the world? And the one thing that keeps coming up is terminology. As an organization, we've even changed our name. That was in Louisville, I believe. And so, getting a better feel, the terminology plays such an important role. However, if you say one word to 10 people, the interpretation, you'll get 10 different interpretations. So we want to kind of take a look at, first of all, what terminology are we using and how are we using it, and so that we can better convey our message, so that we kind of get on the same page. We don't have to call ourselves the same things or use the same words, but at least have like a vocabulary to pull from, so that when we go to the media or we go to a museum or whatever, people understand what it is that we're trying to convey. Because there's, on one hand, there's the creative side, so we're using creative terminology. On another way, there's, the business sense of it, so we're using it for business purposes. And we want to be consistent. And then we have a regional, there's words that we all use in a different region or a different country. It means a totally different thing, too. So we have lots to overcome. It's not an easy process, becoming consistent and finding the terminology to use, so that we can then take the third step and go out to the world and promote our work and publicize it to the best of our ability. And So I think then we'll start with Peg.
Great. I come to rug hooking as a craftsperson. I'm a product of the 60s, and you know, we were crafty people. And I dabbled in all of the crafts. But when I found rug hooking, they all just sat in little piles, and that was the one that was important for me. And the really important thing that happened is I became a juried member of the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen. And they're not afraid to use the word craft. It's the oldest crafts organization in the United States. It was founded in 1932, and it's highly respected throughout the country, and we even get people internationally coming. We have a big juried fair every summer, and we get people from all over the world that come there. And I think that terminology becomes less important when you have the respect of the work. And to become juried, I thought this would be interesting to you, the standards criteria to become a juried member there. For rug hooking specifically, materials must be fundamentally transformed by the craftsperson, resulting in finished work which demonstrates technical fluency, integrity of intent and result, and a spirited sense of personal vision. Right there, if we could all do that, we'd be great. Materials of good quality and appropriate for the purpose, surface consistent with the pattern motif, edges finished appropriately, hand dyeing of materials is encouraged. The work must demonstrate more than technical proficiency and more than the reproduction of a recognized style. The product must reflect the personal aesthetic and vision of the maker, every attention to detail, design, function, and finish. Harmony of intent, process, and result is the measure of successful work. So right there, you have the respect of everyone because the quality is there. Rug hooking is still well represented in the state. My friend Ann Winterling later this month is going to be honored as one of the Governor's Arts Awards for Folk Heritage Award. And they just have a tremendous reputation for excellence. So whether or not it's a craft or an art becomes less important. In fact, I spoke with the current head of the standards program at the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, telling her that I was coming here, the topic. And she said that, and she's a printmaker, she said that amongst her colleagues, they would never call themselves artists. They call themselves crafts people, and it's up to the viewer to decide if they're an artist. And I think that's an important part. In another area, I was informally mentored by Gloria Krause from Olympia, Washington, and she began making large hooked pieces in the 60s as part of the 1% for the Arts program in the state of Washington. And if you don't know what that is, any public building, 1% of the value of the building had to be spent on arts that would be installed in public spaces. And she said not many people were doing large artwork, and so she was able to fill a niche. But she called her work hooked variations. So if you're looking for some terminology, that was her term. But in the beginning, she did not mention hooking at all. Her colleagues advised her against it because at that time, rug hooking had a very folksy, craftsy, not a very polished look to it. And it was only after she had developed her reputation that she could become involved in the rug hooking community and to call herself a rug hooker, which she did, although she did call her surface, hooked variations. And she incorporated any technique that would send the message. So that was her point of view. Now, back to my own thing. I don't have an arts background. So when I got started, if someone had said that I was going to be an artist, I probably would have said, "Oh, that's not for me. I can't do that." But there's something about calling something a rug that you might potentially walk on. It gives you courage. And I don't really like the term rug very much in my work because none of it does go on the floor. But I like the roots of it, and I like that we do allow ourselves that part. You know, I think it's fun to think that you can put on the floor. Did I say enough?
So far.
All right, any questions for Peg? All right, we'll move on to Susan.
I thought I'd explain and discuss conversations, meaning I have throughout my term of being in this journey of rug hooking had to learn a lot of different terminology as I'm speaking to a particular person to explain what I'm doing or to understand what they're doing and be able to have a better conversation. So I started out as a personal interest, and in that part, I just gathered as much information. I read all 3 years of Rug Hooking magazine that were in my library, and then went to an exhibit. I'm pretty lucky, it was by Rug Hooking magazine, and Mary Shepard Burton's work was there, and Joan Moshimer. I didn't get into the tea, but as we were going in and she was leaving, I did some starstruck, you know, that's her. But it was within my family that I was speaking about it, and I was creating these pieces, small pieces at that point, or pieces for the floor, for that log house that we were building. So it was a personal interest. I started from searching with recycled clothing, and that's definitely limited in what's going on. Well, I'm a business person also. I had a gallery, but we were transitioning to West Virginia. I did decide this was going to be my path when we got there, which took 12 years. I have to build the house and pay it off from better income. And in doing that, I set up the website, ruckmanmillfarm.com, created a pattern line because my rugs were hanging in the art gallery that I was working in. Someone came in, a young lady, and she said, "Can't quite afford it. Would you make a pattern?" So the mind's thinking, oh gosh, that's a whole new conversation. All those advertisers in Rug Hooking magazine, how do I do that? It means I have to buy backing, and so I said no. Well, no at that time in my life wasn't really important, so I called her up later and I said, sure. And ruckmanmillfarm.com happened. So a large pattern line. But in doing that, my very first hook-in, I went out with my patterns, and someone bought a pattern, and they went to the next booth, and someone color planned it. Well, I have the same expense that they did, but I wasn't reaping benefits. So now I'm dyeing wool and investing in wool because I do have the talents of color planning and working with people, encouraging them to develop. So it's a new conversation. I'm actually talking with people within the world of our trade in rug hooking. And I cut my wools differently. They're full yard long. The trade has them fat quarters. Had to explain why mine worked because I wasn't changing. So it's changing the conversation, understanding, being positive, listening, asking questions. As I began to teach, I'm self-taught. I'm not through programs, so technique is figured out on my part. And I'm very willing to understand shortcuts or methods and share. I like to ask why something's done and understand that why. And if I have a different method, I'd like to explain it and have a conversation. So I have to learn the cuts and the terminology to be able to speak with people as I'm vending or in teaching, to hear someone rattle off technique, terminology. I had to learn what that meant, and I have. Happy to be self-taught and learning. As Terry Dorr says at Dorr Mill Store, the customer's right. So you have different backings, and everyone has a variety of reasons why they want the backing. I started on monk's cloth. I like monk's cloth. It's cheap also, less expensive. But there are reasons not to use monk's cloth. So learning terminology, learning our materials. As I grew in this world, and we evolved to West Virginia, I was able to travel more. And I've become very involved teaching internationally, which is a pleasure because I get to pop into a region and, as Kathy mentioned, learn about Pragi and really see that technique, or very fine shading done in the Nova Scotia ways, Cheticant, working with the yarns. You know, if you pop into those areas, or even going regionally and seeing the different color palettes that people are working with. So there's a new terminology there because, again, it's addressing what are they surrounding and what are people talking about in their artwork, what do they want to put across in their artwork. Colors change. I respond to orange differently than other people do. And my involvement in TIGHR has been since 2006, certainly earlier than that, as a paying member, but active at that point on a variety of board positions. I've also been the coordinator of regional reps for ATHA, so worked on the national board there. And by doing that, it's an interesting conversation that when we're in board positions, we have to remember the membership is the vital part, and that we are leading with guidance by the members. So that's a different conversation. You don't want to have this power difference of a table all the time. You want to be able to listen to the members and then cull it together and be able to guide an organization as it evolves. Selling artwork. So I've had my product line, my patterns, my wools, my vending. I'm going out in a new world. I'm proud to live in West Virginia, especially because craft and our craftsmen are valued. West Virginia is part of the Mid-Atlantic Arts Council under our National Endowment for the Arts, and at one point, West Virginia was funding the arts in an increase where all the other states decreased. And they look around and go, how can West Virginia do that? We do that because it's an economic opportunity. It's not just, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I'll use the example because I was from New Jersey. In New Jersey, there are a variety of other opportunities for the fine artists to network and create markets for their work. Within West Virginia, we definitely have benefited from the Economic Opportunity Act, which was passed 50 years ago. The government came in to all of our states with trained people who created markets for the craftsmen's work. And that has continued. We have a gallery space called Tamarack. It's the best of West Virginia. It was the very first retail space that is solely dedicated to the arts of that particular state, the arts and crafts, our food, our music, our fine art, our fine crafts, pressed coal little tchotchkes, you know, but they're done with our native resources. And West Virginia was the first. They are in Kentucky, Texas, I believe, has an institution. So that gives you an example of the value that West Virginia places on its artists. I had to jury into Tamarack. You don't just make something and get into this best of West Virginia. And I juried in 2 different stages. So my first products were for the general retail floor, and they're my mats. I was juried in for small shapes because there's travelers come through often, so the market is mostly for travelers. I don't want to say souvenir, but you know, people who are going through, they're not going to be building up a clientele, although the local people do come in and out and buy gifts all the time for the holidays. So my mats were accepted, and then small pins such as this in the jewelry line. But I wanted to get my rug hooking and the craft of rug hooking into the gallery space, into the fine gallery space. So I trekked in. I was a professional picture framer for 20 years. Keep this in mind. And I present my work. Most of it is stretched. Some of it was rugs themselves, but most of it's stretched on stretcher boards, wrapped around. But I'm showing the artwork, the hooking in the back. So in other words, it's not closed off like a frame. I didn't get in. Luckily, my husband was not with me. He was the picture framer. So I have a 5-hour trip talking to myself. And prior to that, I asked the jurors, what is it I need to do to qualify? It's obviously not my work. It was my presentation. So they said, your business card doesn't tell a story. Your artwork, when we look at the back, looks crafted. It's not quite professional. And I said, well, that's fabric on the back. And I, picture framer, double stick tape, put the paper on the back. I didn't know how to close off the back with fabric. So I asked art quilters, how do they present their work? And had a couple processes. One was they use Tyvek, but that's white. It can be in other colors, but I like black for my mounting. So I do a very meticulous handwork process and create a very lovely backing. A year later, I go back into jurying, and yes, I got a perfect score. So I represent rug hooking in the gallery, and I qualified under the category, and this is why I explained this, under fine craft. I'm very proud of that. There are two categories, as Peg described very well. That's the same jurying process: fine craft and fine art. Fine art is paper, canvas, work, or sculpture. And fine craft, again, you're doing your trade skills very well, and then you're putting that extra personality, the soul in your work. You're raising it to another level as fine craft. So any of the other medias that do not fall in photography, watercolor, oil, canvas work, and sculpture that the classic artists consider, they're accepted as fine craft all over the world. It's not just a category for our Appalachian states. So I'm happy that I got qualified there, and those are themed exhibits. My work there is on consignment. If I have a piece, I get it down to the show if it's juried in, and I have to pay to have it shipped back. Or I drive 5 hours to pick it up and have interviews. My purchase work is 50% off of retail. I do not change my prices because I'm selling in the galleries. I have a price that I'm happy with, and I ask the gallery what their commissions are, and if I'm happy with that, then I'll continue a relationship. If I'm not, if I'm uncomfortable with that, I do not raise my price. As a gallery owner, I do not ask an artist, what do you want from it? I ask them, what is your retail? So those are conversations. I'm really excited. This week is American Craft Week for the 6th year. So you can go online, americancraftweek.com, and visit, when you go over the border to the States, a variety of places. Well, West Virginia has just done their studio tour under that auspice for the very first time this year. And I helped network that. So that's the next conversation that I have. And it's within my state, talking to other artists. I'm not in that realm of rug hooking anymore, but I'm really excited to be able to be discussing how careers can develop for fellow artists, again, back in our economic impact, by creating studio tours under West Virginia Craft Week, opening our studios, and seeing the results. It means advertising and branding and marketing that is difficult for artists, but we all need to learn that. And then I think another conversation that I really enjoy having is being a member of the editorial board for Rug Hooking Magazine. I can use that title, and I appreciate the honor. And it opens doors for people when I'm hearing a really great story, and I want to encourage that story to be developed and fed down to Deb so that it can go out to all of us. How I'm looking for someone who's working in an unusual way, tucked away somewhere, a different method, and people do need to be encouraged. So I like to be able to find a talent encourage in a conversation that your talent can be promoted, in this case through a magazine, other ways on media, and that's really a fun conversation for me. So over the 20 years, I've evolved from it's all about me and covering the floors to coming to international conferences and traveling to Australia and Victoria and on to England. I'd like to leave you with it all depends on who I'm talking with, but my message is always, my loop pulling connects me with the past and creates the future. So I really love being involved in those generations, and that's what I do when I'm quiet and pulling those loops. I think about everyone else, in Brigitta's case, her relatives, and you all. Thank you.
Back to
And creates the future. And I didn't say my future.
Any other questions for Susan? All right, Brigitta?
I will be shaping the conversation around 3 topics. Creating, current trends that I see at workshops and rug hooking events, ways to improve the business of rug hooking, packaging, social media, and how we inspire people, young and old, to try our craft. I believe the rug hooking world is on a verge of a major shift from the traditional rug hooking of my grandmother's era. As the generations pass, the craft evolves, bringing new life and different perspectives. Similar to the art quilts movement of the 1970s, rug hooking is experiencing a shift. As I travel to events and workshops, I see more and more alternate materials being used than ever before. Fine silk, sari silk, chiffon, velvet, velour, polar fleece, cotton ribbon, nylon stockings, rovings. In this rug show, there was Tyvek and caribou hide, or I wasn't quite sure how that was actually what the actual product was that was changed, but that was really exciting to see. The subject matter of our pieces are becoming more diverse, political, historical, current events, just all kinds of, Alzheimer's, just different subject matters that are important to us. The 3-dimensional techniques, proddy, rip and wrinkle, quillies, standing wool, are being incorporated with traditional styles of rug hooking more and more. Hooked pieces are being finished in all kinds of different ways, whipped in the shape of the piece, quilted edges, crocheted edges, just all kinds of fabulous new ideas. We are also incorporating rug hooking with all the other fiber arts, knitting, weaving, all within the same piece. You'll have a hooked piece that's hooked and wool applique, or rug hooking and needle punching. I think it was Peg's piece that has real fine needle punched people that are then cut out and put on top of a scene. I thought that was really different. So the rules are being broken, and it's exciting to be around to see it. And there's really no question that the pieces displayed in the other room are works of art and exemplify these contemporary trends happening in the world of rug hooking. So secondly, as a member of this new generation of rug hookers, as a teacher, designer, and business owner, I'm always looking for ways to display merchandise in a more contemporary way. I look at the knitting and weaving companies to see how they do it and see if I can adapt my ideas to their ideas to my product or our product. I absolutely have decided I abhor the plastic Ziploc bag. I do not want the Ziploc bag in my store. We've used them for many years because they're handy. We can open them up, we can look at our colors, we can show people the pattern and show them all the wool in the kit, close it back up again and put it back up on the shelf. But they're pretty unprofessional in the rest of the contemporary world of presenting. Felting, knitting, weaving, all the other products have a much more finished look to them. I've been searching for other ways to display a kit where you can see all the colors and the type of pattern involved. So I've come up with the vinyl plastic box. It's still plastic, which irritates me, but it has a cleaner look. You can still see through it. It's actually much more see-through than a Ziploc bag, and it looks very clean and professional on the shelf. But it adds considerable cost, as all packaging does, and the Ziploc has always been very cheap for us to use. So personally, I'm struggling with the issue of presentation, but as we know, presentation is everything, and I believe that the presentation of the product is essential to appeal to a new generation of rug hookers. So I'm relatively young as hookers go, but I'm not young enough to have been born with a computer in my hand, like my children. It's not intuitive for me, and social media is a challenge, but it is a necessity in today's age. A large majority of people use and rely on social media to get their information. Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and blogs are what's hot. Traditional websites are still needed, but as a home base of information, but they are being viewed less and less as opposed to the other forms of social media. Electronic newsletters and subscriptions are highly desired over paper and magazines that clutter our shelves, and that certainly is the wave of the future. As fiber art goes, rug hooking is a tiny speck compared to the other fiber arts. It's quite amazing. Susan was mentioning the fiber or the art trails. We have one in our county, Sonoma County. We have actually two. We have one in the spring and one in the fall, where everyone gets a map and goes to people's studios and sees and buys their art. Well, there's maybe 3 fiber artists on the entire circuit. So I plan on being the 4th one next year. But we're a very small, fiber arts in general compared to the fine arts are a small group, and rug hooking amongst the fiber arts is very small. I wanted to share a story. My friend Barbara Larson, many of you know her, she's here, she's at a class right now. But she belongs to 128 blogs, 5 of which are rug hooking blogs out of 128. The other 123 are quilting, sewing, knitting, embroidery, and weaving. So how does she keep up with that many blogs? She uses a service called Feedly, and it's a service which alerts her when a blog has posted something new. So she doesn't have to look at 123 blogs a day. But she can keep up on all this information very efficiently. So the message is to get out there and start blogging. Spread the word, talk about what you're doing. You may think that someone else, you don't have nothing to say and someone else has more to say, but that's not true. You can share something and we will all benefit from it. So finally, I wanted to share a bit about my experience of being secretary of ATHA. I've been going to meetings, I think I've been to 3 now. It has been steadily growing over the years, and partly due to the improved newsletter. Kudos to Cheryl Bolenbach for really bringing the ATHA magazine into the future. It started out as pamphlet style, then to saddle stitch, to color. Now it's perfect bound in a nice plastic sleeve and much more professional than it ever was. We have a new education chair, Gene Shepard. I believe he's teaching right now. He's brought wonderful new life and ideas into the education part of ATHA. We'll be implementing a lot of those on the new ATHA website, which just got rebuilt. So there's a lot of exciting things to try to bring ATHA into the new age. So one of his great ideas was to challenge ATHA chapters to introduce and teach rug hooking to children. The idea is if we get rug hooking introduced in youth, that people will do it as when they get a little bit older. If we've never heard about rug hooking, it's really hard to discover it. And, you know, most of us find it stumbling along at the county fair or some relative or friend that they come across. It's not easy to discover rug hooking, and we need to change that. As a child, I was exposed to most of the fiber arts because my mother is an artist, and she tried everything and brought everything home. And of course, I knew about rug hooking because Jane Olsen was my grandmother, as Frida likes to point out to everyone. I designed and sewed my own dress at 7 years old. I was in the newspaper. That was a big deal. I have a picture of myself. I was knitting, weaving, and spinning before the age of 10, carded my own wool. Grandma Jane sent me latch hook kits, which I enjoyed for many years. For some reason, she never started me rug hooking, but it was about when I was 30 years old and I had just had a baby, and I brought her to visit Grandma and Grandpa, and I started rug hooking. And I feel fortunate to have started that at that age, and it was the exposure to the craft that got me there that soon. I think the earlier we can be exposed, the better. Most fiber arts are not taught in the schools. Some fiber arts are introduced in some school settings in the States. The Waldorf education system offers a full curriculum of handwork, they call it. Knitting is taught in first grade, crochet in second, embroidery in third, cross stitch in fourth, fifth grade's back to knitting. In 6th and 7th grades, students move on to sewing. At the high school age, students are introduced to the craftsman arts like blacksmithing, spinning, quilting, woodworking, weaving, basket making, bookbinding. My kids went to public school, not to Waldorf school, and their experience, we had a great grade school and middle school with a great art program, but it's focused on ceramics and drawing, fine arts. No fiber arts unless a particular teacher in a particular classroom introduced it. And in high school, at the high school level, my daughter had sculpture and other fine art classes, but no fiber arts at all. In the same, the most exciting thing I have to share with you is when I was at the Biennial last month in San Antonio, Texas. I met a woman named Vicki Rudolph. She was in my class, and she lives in Colorado. She's getting her master's in fine art at a prestigious art school in the States. At her request, I'm not mentioning the name of the school because she doesn't want to jeopardize anything. But for the first time in the history of the art school, they're accepting her thesis in the medium of rug hooking. She has to present her pieces in painted form first, also with the hooked pieces, and they have to be as a typical thesis, I believe, which is a part of a series and a grouping. So she's just really excited. Her professors are really excited, but she's just was hesitant for me to mention the school in case, I don't know, she doesn't want to mess anything up. So I felt that that was truly exciting and marked respect for rug hooking at the fine art level. If we can bring fine art to the schools as a respected art medium, I think we can say that the art of rug hooking has arrived. Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions for Brigitta? All right. Well, from my perspective, these three ladies sitting up here are very talented artists. I, on the other hand, are a very average rug hooker. I hook because I enjoy it, I admire it, But that doesn't mean I don't have passion for rug hooking. My passion falls in a totally different area, and that is, it's so upsetting to me not to be able to see pieces in museums, in galleries. And then even if you do, there's a little card next to it that says usually unknown artist, unknown region it's from, maybe a vague description, and things like that. So my passion is documenting other talented artists, and I do that through the book series and also through the exhibit. We tell a full story when it comes to an exhibit. We get pictures and we tell stories, and instead of having a tiny little description card, we will have pages, 8.5 by 11 pages of information on the artist and their work or their materials or their techniques. So that's where my passion comes in. And just getting ready, I have 6 weeks between wrapping up one event. We have over 5,000 attend every year, and so it's quite an undertaking, and we have about 36 classes each year, and this year we had over 700 pieces in the exhibit, so it's a fairly large event to coordinate. And I have 6 weeks to wrap up from the close in August of one event till we have our next event ready on the website for people to sign up. And so this is the time frame when I'm asking teachers for information for their classes. And you know, almost every camp you go to or whatever, there's a little paragraph that tells you about what the class is going to be. Well, that's where I think it's very difficult for me, because it's like, I want to know more. I want to know, what's the goal of that class? What can you do with that techniques and knowledge in that class after that class? Who is the teacher? What cuts are you going to be working in? And things like that. So the poor, unfortunate teachers that come and work with me every year, they get, you know, like a ton of questions, and we end up with a description this long instead of a little paragraph, because I think that's also part of it, that, and I ask the teachers to talk in third person about themselves, because usually they don't give themselves credit. So sometimes when they give me that one little paragraph, we're going to hook this mat and do this technique, I think to myself, well, like, why? You know, why are we going to do that? So I have the teacher pull out, like, you know, that she had worked in a series and developed this technique, and this is what you can do with it, and, you know, and things like that. So I think it's really important as artists that you think of your customer. What can you offer them, and put that information out there about yourself. You know, a really good bio. Have a really good bio on yourself. And not just, you know, where you've been published or whatever, but talk about your style. Talk about where you've evolved. Most artists don't hook the same type of design, the same color palette, the same thing. So where have you been? You know, give us a little trip around the world with you. Where did you start? You know, what have you veered off into? And things like that. So, and then as far as promoting yourself, it's very hard. Women's art and textile art, you've kind of got two things working against you right off the bat. So that's kind of hard to, you know, to deal with. But you just kind of keep going to the media, and you have to learn. And I think, whereas I think it helps to educate our media, because they have no clue. They have absolutely no clue. You know, either half of them think it's latch hook, or, you know, half of them don't know anything about it. So you have to kind of educate them. Put out press releases that, you know, you can do a press release for your own work. Or let's say your group is having an exhibit, you know, at the library or whatever. Or you've just done a collection or a series of projects and it's going to be in a gallery. do a press release on yourself. And if you've never done a press release, get help. And make sure you have in that press release what your art is and who you are. Have your story in there and the story of what you're doing. But don't be disheartened if it doesn't show up in the paper, or maybe you've submitted 10 and one show up, or maybe they've twisted it. That happens a lot to me. One year in the exhibit, we had well over $1 million of collection from antique rugs borrowed from private collectors. So I was so eager for the media to pick up on it, because these are antique hooked rugs that are worth so much money. And this was an opportunity. You'd never get to see them because they're in private homes. And if they're in museums, they're in their vaults. So again, you're not seeing them. So it's like getting the word out. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They totally didn't care. Had no interest whatsoever. But we had two artists who had hooked all the United States presidents. And they liked that. And the title on the article read, "Hookers Do the Presidents." So although I wasn't thrilled with their twist on it, it not only got syndicated publications, I mean, it went viral across the United States. We had television cameras in there from, more than our local Ohio. And so sometimes you have to take the good with the bad. Look at it from the perspective of it got the word out there. And so it doesn't always turn out how you like it, but that's just how life is. So you just keep trying. And I think that documenting, we've started a documentation. We're in our second year of a documentation program where you can come and we photograph your rugs. You have to fill out this ungodly 6 or 8 page form. And but that way we won't have as many of those little cards that say unknown artist. It's like 100 years from now, someone's going to find one of your rugs in an attic someplace. And so, so that we don't have all those unknown, put the labels on, put a story, wrap up the story with the rug, do pictures. So, promote yourself, and I think one of the best ways is to talk about yourself in third person. Then you don't feel guilty, because as women, we don't kind of like to pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves enough credit. So talk about yourself as somebody else, and I think that helps. So now we've got some questions that were submitted. And then, also open it up to other questions. I think one of the questions was really kind of fun. If you have to describe rug hooking to a gallery or a museum director, or to someone who is 20 years old, a young lady, or a newspaper reporter, or whatever. So one of our panelists, do you have a comment or a suggestion for that?
Well, I'll start. One of the problems is the technique that we do uses a hook, and so it's called hooking. And as long as we have that, we're going to get the comments that you get in your press release, and it's hard to get the respect if you use that word. And until we come up with another, I've seen, looped pile, I've seen hooked pile. I mean, there are lots of things, but nothing that's really clicked. So it's very hard to describe. If I need to, I just say I'm a fiber artist with a pile, surface.
I was asked by the gallery owner in West Virginia to describe my work, because she was creating an extensive blog, more than a little caption on my piece. It was very interesting. She read my artist statement about the piece. She read my blog, my background, all of that. I thought I gave her enough information she could figure it out. And her question was, how do you do it? And I thought, well, her audience is going to glass over if I do the 100-word thing. Well, you do this, you strip it, and you have to cut it, and then so I gave her the big paragraph for her background information. And then I thought, I need to do this in 25 words or less. And I got to the point, I think in my terminology, and I try to avoid the hook where possible, I am cutting fabric into strips and pulling those strips up through a loose weave fabric to create loops as I paint with my wool. That's what she put in a couple little better wording for the blog. So she used the short one. Instead of all the tools and the equipment, which I did describe the frame and the hooks and all. And I think when I talk with someone in the elevator or on the plane, it's been pretty fun because I pin one of these pins on outside my bag. And I say I'm an artist, and they go, okay, you know, a little more conversation. Well, I work in fiber. Oh, that's interesting. Well, what do you do with that? And then I'm able to show them a small piece and say, it's a tradition of rug making. But if I say I'm a hooker or hooking, rug hooking, I think people close down. So I try to avoid hooking and rug first and approach it as I'm trying to work my attitude and my approach that I'm an artist working in a medium with a particular technique.
And I think another one of the questions is...
Stand up and pop it up. Kathy used this one.
Another one of the questions is because our art is primarily crafted by women, is that, already against us, And I think I've kind of covered that already. And, I think that is a problem. I think that if we had more men in our art, there would be more elevation to that and more attention. And actually, to that, we are... In 2017, we are going to have, at Rug Cooking Week at Sauter Village, we are going to do a total focus on men, the men of rug cooking, because I don't think you realize how many men are out there, but they're not quite as, they're not in the numbers that we are as women, but they're also, there are artists hooking in New York City at home, they're not... they're all over, but they don't tend to be in the groups and be quite as active. So that's another element, and we want to kind of bring them and welcome them.
I have another. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Just momentarily, but a little bit of my experience. I guess how long I've been a member of the Service Design Association in Vancouver, and I know that when I first started in that group, so it must be 7, 8 years. And I know that it took a little while for me to kind of break in. And I know when I first brought my rugs, I would bring them in. It was a series work, it was solo exhibition work. And it took a while to sort of get in there and to get accepted by my members. But, I kept showing up, I kept going to the meetings, and eventually the work, it's sort of exponential. So I started being made out there, and there were different opportunities that were available to me. So it took a few years, but through just showing up, doing consistent work, getting involved in major open studio events, exhibiting locally, nationally, and internationally, it started to shift the conversation. It was slow, but it started to happen. And I think, like, for instance, with the SDA, what's starting to happen is that our members are getting grants for to do projects. We're being, our handcooking is being, receiving awards of excellence in exhibitions. Mm-hmm. So it's actually starting to happen. And there's, we've got Rugby Magazine, but also Fiber Art Now, which is a big supporter for us, I think, in North America. But also SBA, we are starting to break through, and it is starting to happen. So it has been gradual, but it also feels like we're on the kind of the cusp of something quite exciting. So I just want to mention that. And there are people like Gloria Krause, too, because I know with Gloria,
Well, and I know at Rug Cooking Week, we welcome all the mixed media and the different materials and the different techniques. And I think that's starting to extend to local groups and regional groups and organizations too, that it doesn't have to be just 100% hooked, 100% wool, that everything is welcome, and that concept too. And the concept of can we have art without craft, or just the terminology of the two different words, and are they do they complement each other, or do we need one, do we need the other, and so I think that they're both important. I don't think we can just have one or the other.
I'd like to speak to that. I think of myself and all of us as craftspeople. I mean, the craftsmanship, you can't have the art without craftsmanship. Mm-hmm. And again, is it art? Well, you might think so, but you might not. That's more, it's in the eye of the beholder, as they say. But I just think we're craftspeople first. I think a watercolorist is a craftsperson. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not just the crafty things. I'd like to refer to some of the crafts that have given us all a bad name as craft with a capital K. And that's the difference. But I'd like to go back to your comment about the women. I've met a number of men who hook rugs, and I have to tell you, some of them do not feel welcomed mm-hmm. in some of the rug hooking gatherings. Mm-hmm. They feel as though they're marginalized. I mean, even to the point, you go to a workshop and there wasn't even a men's restroom. Mm-hmm. I was teaching at one, and I had to go guard the restroom so the poor man could go to the bathroom. I mean, that's marginalized. And so I think that there are a lot of men out there who hook, but I don't think that they're going to join as long as we stay within our own little groups. And so we have to make a big effort. And I applaud you for having a special exhibit of theirs, because I think it's important to encourage them, because I've met a lot of them. When I've demonstrated rug hooking, there would be men of a certain age. They would all come up and say, I did this during World War II. Right. It was one of the things that they all did as therapy. Mm-hmm. And they remember it, and so they know what rug hooking is. But I have a question. At the meeting weren't you using these new little square things that you could, what are they called?
Yeah, it's a word with no vowels.
Right.
Skirik or something like
right.
that. And so we had to go, do you know the name of it? No. We had to go online. I did several for my 3 rugs, and we had to go online, register. It was all free. And the rug exhibit chair mm-hmm. sent us a picture of our little chip, what are they? Little scan code. Mm-hmm. And so then I downloaded that into the program. This is my chip, and then you could do audio, video, or written. So I just wrote a paragraph about each of my rugs and what inspired me and why I hooked them and what they were about. And then you could walk around the rug show and you could just take a picture of that. And then later you could go online, and so you didn't have to do it all right at the rug show. You could take a picture of these little things and then go on the website and read more information about them.
But I was thinking that might be a wonderful thing to use when someone wants to know how you do it. Mm-hmm. You could have one of those little square things that you click on, and you could show somebody doing it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't need those words. We don't need no stinking words.
She's going to do video.
I wanted to address a couple of those things, if you don't mind. The art versus craft. I don't think you can have one without the other. I think we don't want to intimidate people from trying the craft if we call it art. there has to be room for all levels of rug hooking, from the person who picks it up and does a replica of someone else's rug to the artist who's pushing all the boundaries. I think every one of those people is important. And as far as the men go, my son is a rug hooker, and he designs his own pieces. He's 14, and he's been exposed. And all those guys, all those boy kids, all those males in the Waldorf program are all getting exposed to fiber arts. So, it's become a women's thing because most of us knitters, crocheters, weavers have more men, I think, generally, but we need to encourage them and foster that at a younger age, and we will have more men, and so I'm excited about that.
And I wanted to contribute, I call this my Bible. It's the second copy that I purchased because the first one was dog-eared and written in. I've never written my books, but it feels like a textbook to me. I put it on the bottom of your handout. And I loaned it to someone without my name in it. So I've bought a new one, and I'm reading it again, and of course looking at it in different ways. And this is discussing the quandary that art quilts people have had. So it's that journey, or the weavers. It discusses breaking that ceiling of introducing textile and having an exhibit at the Modern Art Museum in New York, and what the critics called it, and the terminology. And a lot of times, the women that are discussed in the 60s and 70s, Judy Chicago, they came from painting and then picked up textiles. And that's an interesting, and it's a safer way. It was discussed that this person is able to qualify her thesis, but she needs to show it in the fine art world, and then you can do your craft well. So there are bridges, but I really appreciate String Felt Thread by Alyssa Author. I'm enjoying it. And one particular point that she puts in here, I've paralleled to rug hooking. She talks about two different weavers, and I'm sorry I can't rattle off who they are, but I will translate it to rug hooking. One is a traditionalist, and that would be Pearl McGowan. And bless Pearl for creating the program and the techniques and the rigidity of knowing exactly what's being done and how setting up the structure so that the techniques are learned well, and all those skills in creating that McGowan heritage. And I just asked someone recently, and that person believes that if she was alive today, she'd be more progressive. So that's interesting. But the other person, and in the book, it's a different medium, or different technique. But to me, it would be Mary Shepard Burton. Mary knows all those skills. She's highly technically advanced. Her eye for color and composition, advanced. But in her book, she talks about a color wheel, that it's a tool, not a crutch. She encourages everyone. She published in her book people in a variety of other textile mediums within her book of rug hooking. And she embraced everyone of all different ages. So she was accepting and being able to bring people in to introduce them to rug hooking as little or as much as they wanted. Whereas the structure, I'm sorry, but if I had to do a fine cut flower, I wouldn't be here today. Someone just showed me how to pull the loops. That was it. That's my journey that I was happy with. So those two worlds, they're discussed here. It's not unusual. We're not making something new. It happened then, and I'm sure it happened before. It was the struggles of communicating to those other worlds, being as strong as Rochelle and other artists to say, my work is standing on its own. I'm happy with it.
And I think, there, it went back. Okay, I think the other aspect of Mary, I think Mary was very good at self-promoting herself. I think that, again, that's another area. And if you don't want to think of it that way, think of it as sharing your passion with other people. Don't think of it as self-promoting. Think of it